Harvester is theoretically a point-and-click horror adventure game, but it comes off more like an extended fever dream than a video game. Harvester released in '96 after a 2-year delay, though I didn't discover the game until it was re-released by Night Dive Studios in 2014, and it quickly became one of my favorites. I was 16 at the time, and back then I didn't think there could ever be a game more fucked up than Postal 2, but lo and behold, here comes a game touting itself as the most violent adventure game ever made, and sure as shit does it live up to the hype. It drew me in with its weird visuals, intriguing premise, and absurd levels of violence. I mean, Jesus Christ. Harvester has you playing as Steve, an amnesiac who wakes up in the town of Harvest in 1953, where everything seems just a little bit off. In order to uncover the truth behind Harvest and his lost memories, Steve has to join the cult located right smack in the middle of town by performing some minor pranks on the townspeople. And if he doesn't get in by Sunday, he'll have to donate in the annual blood drive.
Until it hurts, I suppose.
Until it hurts.
If this game looks like something you'd be interested in and you have a high tolerance for jank, I highly suggest that you exit out of this video right now and go play it, because this is one of those games that you really need to experience for yourself. So that's my recommendation. On to the review. Starting off the game, you immediately get the impression that Harvest is a creepy place from the intro cutscene, but it's within the first few minutes of gameplay that you realize there's much more going on here when Steve mentions how retro the house looks but can't pinpoint why. From there you notice that everything around you seems a bit off. Your little brother is watching some kind of cowboy show with realistic depictions of death, your mother does nothing but bake cookies, and not a single person in town believes you have amnesia, saying,
"You always were a kidder, Steve."
Already you know there's something inherently wrong with Harvest. The most jarring thing here is when these people that look like they jumped out of a Norman Rockwell painting start talking about the cult that runs the town, the Order of the Harvest Moon. It seems like everyone in town wants you to join. Your mom even gives you a cryptic warning that you're gonna die if you're not in the lodge by the end of the week. There's only one problem though, you need an application. This is the first real puzzle in the game. The Sergeant-at-Arms telepathically advises you that you can get an application from Postmaster Boyle, but he's all out and only makes copies once a month. Now all you can do is wander around town and soak in some information. All around town you see the same patterns. Everything seems normal at first until you start asking questions, then people start saying some weird shit. There's a lot of social and political commentary here. Everyone in Harvest is some kind of exaggerated 1950s stereotype, and the game isn't exactly subtle about what it's trying to say about them. That kind of in-your-face commentary could be extremely frustrating in another work, but here it actually serves to enhance the atmosphere. Combined with the 90s CGI, the obvious costumes, and the green-screened FMV people, Harvest truly feels like a small town seen from the perspective of aliens. Nobody's out to get you, but you're constantly on edge because you can't trust anybody. The only person you can trust is your supposed fiancée Stephanie, who's got the same problem as you, only her parents won't let her leave her room. After a bit of snooping and buying a porn magazine for Deputy Loomis, you find out that Sheriff Dwayne is blackmailing Boyle over burning down the Sentinel newspaper building 6 months ago. In exchange for giving him the evidence against him, Boyle gives you a lodge application, and that's when the real game begins. Now every day, this Sergeant-at-Arms tasks you with a minor prank to pull on the townsfolk, which become more and more severe by the day. Honestly, it's your pretty standard point-and-click gameplay loop. The big difference is that Harvester forces you to reflect on your horrible actions. Nowadays, games that deconstruct the player mentality of doing whatever they're told to progress aren't a new thing, but this was '96. Harvester was pretty ahead of its time in that regard. Being a point-and-click, the controls are pretty standard stuff too. You click somewhere and you walk there, though you can also use the arrow keys to move. Inventory controls are streamlined to be as simple and unobtrusive as possible, so there's no problem there. The only real flaw with the controls are just how clunky they can be when moving around, but you hardly ever need to move around at all, so this isn't a big deal. Yet. Once you have all the items required for a prank, nightfall hits and Steve can carry out his mission. Some items can be a pain in the ass to find since they blend into the surroundings or are hidden in easily missable spots. One annoying aspect of the day-night cycle is that once you've talked to the Sergeant-at-Arms that day, the game immediately goes into prank mode the minute you have all the items you need, meaning you can potentially miss content if you talk to him with everything you need for the prank already in your inventory. Stuff like characters you can get away with killing, a get-out-of-jail-free card for characters you can't get away with killing, and a few conspiracies you can stumble upon but can't do anything about. They're not that important because they don't affect the ending in any way, but optional content is always nice. Really, the gameplay isn't terribly special, it's everything surrounding it that makes Harvester so interesting. Originally, Harvester was slated for a 1994 release and had a very different visual style, but was delayed to film new FMV sequences and make the game more like Phantasmagoria. While the production values are about what you'd expect from an old FMV game, Harvester has some surprisingly decent voice acting for a game released right around the same time as games like Resident Evil and Symphony of the Night.
But now feel my unbridled wrath!
It's not all fantastic.
I mean, look at the damn thing. Seem like a harmless bunch of Masons to you?
But there's some genuinely good performances here like Sheriff Dwayne, and when the performances are corny, they're intentionally corny.
I won't share my meat with him. My meat! My meat!
One of my favorite parts of Harvester is the soundtrack. It sets the mood perfectly. Even the goofier songs manage to twist themselves into something uncomfortable. The main theme might even be the creepiest thing I've ever listened to. I haven't talked a whole lot about the violence, but like, what the fuck do I even have to say about it? I live for this kind of shit, and some of the gore here is the most brutal and disturbing I've seen in probably anything ever. Some cutscenes make me laugh out loud, but others still make me legitimately uncomfortable even 5 years later. Characters die in almost every conceivable manner, and Harvester doesn't even stop there, because it tackles more controversial subject matter than I have time to list here. It's shocking that this game didn't cause more controversy than it did when it released in '96, but after the 2-year delay, I guess the media just forgot about Harvester altogether. Once you've completed all your missions, the lodge opens its doors, and you can't possibly be prepared for what's inside as the game takes a hard left into survival horror. But Bronson, you might say, survival horror? I thought he said this was a point and click. How the fuck does that work? Well, you see, Harvester has a combat system.
What?
You can't possibly call yourself the most violent adventure game of all time if you can't kill anyone, so Future Vision implemented a half-baked combat system. While it's a pretty interesting twist on the point-and-click adventure formula, it's also the worst part of the game. After equipping Steve with a weapon, holding down right-click on an enemy, or controlling an arrow key will let Steve attack, and you better pray to God Almighty that you stunlock them, otherwise you're eating shit. If the enemy's got a gun though, just forget about it. There's no other way to avoid damage here. The combat controls are so clunky that you can't run away and adjust your spacing like in your average action game. You've got some guns and some healing items to make things less painful, but they're much scarcer here than most survival horror games, and this entire part of the game is all about combat. If you run out of resources and you don't have multiple saves, you're fucked. Playing Harvester requires you to look deep inside yourself and think about just how much jank you're willing to put up with in a video game. I'm a crazy person so I can take it, but I can tell that something this bad could be a potential deal breaker for some. More than just some combat, the entirety of the lodge may as well be a different game. Structurally, it has more in common with games like Resident Evil, in that Harvester has you running around a building, finding keys to reach new areas, and fighting monsters along the way. Aesthetically, on the other hand, this part of the game drops the creepy 50s sitcom vibe and becomes utter madness. Suddenly, you're put in supernatural and improbable situations that only become more absurd as you progress through the lodge. You couldn't have possibly expected the game to change the rules on you like this, which is why the lodge is my favorite part of the game, flaws and all. There's a lot of trial and error here, which is unfortunate, but on the plus side, you're completely unchained. Yeah, no more worrying about the pesky law enforcement. After all the frustration of feeling totally hopeless in town, the catharsis here is unmeasurable. You're here to save your girlfriend, get some answers, and anyone that gets in your way fucking dies. The last stretch of the game has you running through the temples of mystery, with each one having something to say about society and human nature, and one room being so fucking disgusting that it was the only scene censored in the European version of the game. This area makes no logical sense. There's no reason these things should be happening here within the lodge, all right next to each other, but if you think that matters at this point, then you haven't been paying attention. Some rooms have multiple ways to get through, but others are purely kill or be killed. You better hope you've got resources before taking on the temples, because there's no ammo here and only one health pickup. You make one mistake here and you're up the river. Once you power through the temples and reach the Chapel of Love, Harvester finally reveals its hand. The Sergeant-at-Arms tells Steve the truth about Harvest, that it's actually a VR simulation designed to condition people into becoming serial killers. Through breaking down Steve's principles through the pranks, letting him run wild in the lodge, and instilling in him a strong hatred of society, Steve has become desensitized to all the violence around him, and he's starting to think he enjoys it. In other words, Steve's been playing violent video games, and now he's violent himself. Now hold on a goddamn second, you might say. Did the most violent adventure game of all time just tell me that violent video games are bad? Not necessarily. The Sergeant-at-Arms gives you an ultimatum. Either kill Stephanie and become a harvester in the real world, or refuse and live out the rest of your life, which is only about 5 seconds in the real world, in Harvest with her. This choice right here is where I think Harvester ascends from a fun little horror game to artistic brilliance. The way I interpret it, the game isn't asking Steve whether or not he wants to become a serial killer, he's already dead set on it. It's asking you whether or not you want to kill people. Throughout the game you've seen and done terrible things, some of which probably felt pretty good, but others would have made any decent person sick to their stomach. All these terrible things may have been fake in the end, but killing a real person now would make you no better than all the people in Harvest that you've come to loathe after all this time. To put it bluntly, you've just played the most violent video game ever made. Does this really make you want to kill people in real life? This is some pretty high concept stuff for a game released in 1996. If you refuse the Sergeant's offer, then surprise surprise, life goes on, you can live with the knowledge that you can enjoy fictional violence while acknowledging that it's fictional. On the other hand, if you kill Stephanie, then congratulations. The game lets you know that you, the gamer at home, are a fucking crazy person and your dumb bitch of a mother is totally right about what Mortal Kombat's doing to your brain.
You'll rot your mind playing games like that. Don't you know people who watch violence become violent themselves?
That's bullshit, Mom.
No, it isn't. Why do you think they started cutting the violence out of those Roadrunner cartoons?
Roadrunner cartoon. Roadrunner cartoon?
Mechanically, Harvester is very simple, but even with its flaws, the way Harvester handles the game's central concept in relation to its gameplay propels it to a legitimate piece of postmodern art in my eyes. Even without the subtext, Harvester is a good horror game, but it saddens me when I see people list off all these games they consider to be art and exclude this one. Maybe it's because of the subject matter, maybe it's because it looks cheap as hell, or maybe it's because it's so goddamn obscure, but Harvester shouldn't be written off as just some goofy FMV game from the 90s. The argument over violent video games making people violent isn't as prevalent as it was in '96, but it hasn't gone away, and Harvester's views on the matter are just as relevant 23 years later. That's a pretty big compliment for the jankiest piece of shit I've ever played in my life.